I've divided middle childhood coverage into two parts. One part of it, this one, would be physical and cognitive. The second part would be socio-emotional development. For both, we're looking at the same time period, ages 6 to 11. So let's get started. It might be a good idea to start our chapter with a definition of what middle childhood actually is. Generally, ages 6 to 11 would encompass middle childhood. It corresponds perfectly to some theorists' stages, others not so much, as we'll see. Let's now consider physical changes. The growth is now slower. So you might remember in early childhood, the child was doing about 3 inches a year, which still, if you think about it, still should amaze you. It is now slowed to 2 inches a year on average, but that's still impressive. Imagine what you'd have to do with your wardrobe in 3 years if you were growing 2 inches a year. Girls are now starting to exceed boys in both height and weight. So we think of the typical man being bigger and heavier and stronger than the woman, not during middle childhood. Let's now consider motor changes. Children at this age are now better at motor skills, both fine and gross. We should also note that PE classes, phys ed classes, are not sufficient to keep a child well exercised and healthy. If you consider the number of schools in our country that have daily PE classes, it does peak in middle childhood, but that peak is a mere 8%. Far fewer schools in early childhood or senior high schools have daily PE. You should also note that 1 in 4, almost 25%, have no PE classes whatsoever. And again, PE classes are not sufficient to maintain exercise with a child that's not exercising sufficiently outside of it. But with no PE, obviously it's a more serious consideration. Most children in middle childhood simply are not active enough. Far fewer walk to school now than previous generations, and there's far less playing outside. How could they? They're busy texting. The average child in middle school is on social media roughly 5.5 hours a day. That leaves little time for the physical adventures and physical activities of yesteryear, and we'll tie this into various considerations, including increased anxiety, increased depression, and increased obesity. And you might say, well, what's wrong with using your phone and walking? Not safe. We know texting and driving, not safe. Walking and texting, not safe either. In the previous slide, we suggested that most children aren't getting enough physical exercises. Part of the problem, clearly, not all schools have PE classes. 25% don't. Most children aren't walking to school. Most children aren't playing outside. What are they doing in all their free time? I'm sure you know, social media. So how much is too much? Consider both these quotes below. Which one do you think comes from the AAP? And as a review, what did we say the AAP stood for again? So read them and decide which one do you think you want to vote for. Well, let's start with the acronym. First one is American Academy of Pediatrics. In terms of which quote, they're actually both from the AAP. The first one was prior to 2023. In 2023, they changed it to the bottom one. So actually both. So when you visit a doctor, what sort of questions are they asking before they get to the symptom that brought you in? Mine asks, do I feel safe? Which I like. It's asking about domestic violence. Have I fallen lately? Probably ask more of older people than younger people. Question geared to assess whether I'm depressed or not. I like them asking that too. But if you're a parent, it's typical that pediatricians will ask a question about screen time. Consider all the following negative associations with excessive screen time use in children. This list is from the AACAP, which you do not need to know what this one stands for, but this is the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatrists. So let's take a look at this list. Watching violence, which can desensitize a child, but they can also be cyberbullied. And unfortunately, some children have committed suicide due to cyberbullying, or gets them exposed to potential child sexual predators. Videos of stunts inspiring rather unsafe behavior. Sexual content which they're not ready for, or drug use content. Negative stereotypes about other groups of people. Lower grades in school and reading fewer books. If you're spending between 5.5 and 6 hours on social media use per day, doesn't leave a lot of time for reading at this age. Advertising aimed at the child. So as parents, whenever a child wants anything, one should try to determine where this want came from and see if it's just social media advertisement or all their friends have it on social media. Less time with family and friends. Less time spent learning other ways to relax and have fun that don't require a device in your hand. Sleep problems, and not just insomnia, but a variety of sleep problems. Not enough outdoor and physical activities where we began our journey here. Being overweight or actually obese and or having poor body images. Disorders of mental illnesses, including but not limited to mood or anxiety problems, or the prominent fear apparently of missing out. And this is not a complete list, but extensive, admittedly. So certainly parents aren't helpless in this regard. This is currently part of just modern parenting. First of all, talk to your child about what they are seeing. Point out good behaviors that you would like to see more of, such as cooperation, friendship, concern for others. Be aware of how advertising is influencing your child and their choices. Encourage your child to do other activities as well. Think of some other activities other than being on the cell phone. This might also include you too, by the way. So what other activities? Playing with neighborhood kids, sports, music, arts, hobbies, walks in nature. Set a good example for yourself with healthy screen habits. Surely you can't ask them to do what you're not doing yourself. Teach children about online privacy and safety. Also, create in your house or home screen-free times, hopefully just before bedtime within an hour, at family meals, and hopefully in the bathroom where they can be doing all sorts of things out of your sight on the phone. Also create screen-free zones, such as bedrooms and bathrooms. Screens in public areas are far easier to monitor. And depending on the age of the child, use parental control on the devices to limit either screen time or to restrict certain content, which is being pictured on the bottom here. Hopefully a number of them, including modeling good screen habits yourself and finding other things to do other than using the screen, such as talk with your family and share your day. Less time is being spent on invented games, perhaps with the neighborhood kids, and more time spent on adult organized team sports. Oh, the poor parents. What are some of the issues that might make this difficult? Think for a moment. Certainly there's the cost of transporting the child or going to attend events with the child. There's often uniform costs, special gear costs, sometimes participation fee costs. There might be camps to help accelerate the child in terms of a higher quality of sport. So quite a few problems for parents, though still many do enjoy it quite a bit. Still, it's a big obligation. Let's take a worldview look at childhood obesity. Which country do you think has the most obese children in terms of percentage? I know you're thinking the US. No, we're actually second, with China being in the first place for many of the same reasons. Urbanization, too much time on the cell phone, diet's not healthy. So many similar factors. And I should mention that obesity in children is an increasing problem, and any area of the world that's fully developed and even becoming a problem in some of the developing countries as well. Nutrition affects us all, both mental functioning and overall health. Poor nutrition negatively affects quite a few things well documented in middle childhood. It can actually impact IQ scores, obviously daily learning, the ability to sustain attention, and various health factors, including but not necessarily limited to obesity. We'll consider obesity and school lunches in future slides here. The last time I taught this course was in a face-to-face section when we went into COVID. At that point, the Trump White House was trying to actively decrease the number of children receiving free school lunches. I thought I also mentioned that various first ladies have championed various causes. Do you remember the first lady that championed nutrition and school lunches? That would be Michelle Obama. But back to my other question, where do we stand now in terms of free lunches in the United States? So quite a few colors and shadings. It basically comes down to one of two things. Some states have it either permanent or temporary. Other states have not moved in that direction at all. The states shown in the lightest grayish color would be the ones that have no policy and are not moving in that direction. The other states have at this point a policy in place which might be being made permanent or might be done on a yearly basis. I couldn't help but notice that the states that have no policy are predominantly Republican states, so you wouldn't think that school lunches would be a partisan issue, but apparently it is. So to be considered overweight, the child has to be in the 85th percentile in terms of body mass index. To be obese, they have to be 95% or higher in the index. What are some of the documented results of obesity in childhood? Peer rejection, definitely one. Decrease in self-esteem, actually negatively impacting academics. Increased anxiety and depression, and increase in childhood diabetes. As adults, they put themselves, or they are at risk for various severe health problems, including heart issues, respiratory issues, gallbladder issues requiring surgery, sleep apnea, and diabetes, just to name a few. So a pattern that would lead to lifelong problems can begin in middle childhood, or a pattern leading to lifelong good health can be established in middle childhood. So the findings discussed on this slide are exactly parallel to what we saw in early childhood. So go ahead and see if you can remember what percent would have chronic illnesses for early childhood, again, same as for middle childhood, and what is the most common chronic illness by far. The picture there shows you one of the two possibilities, and what are some of the most other common chronic illnesses of childhood. Consider that, and then you can click for the answers. So we learned that 20 to 25% have chronic illnesses. The most common by far, is it cancer or asthma? It would be asthma. What were some of the other chronic and serious health conditions we noted? Sickle cell anemia for sure, diabetes, cancer, and even HIV, amongst some of the highest ones of concern. We'll now focus our attention on three mental disorders that first appear in early childhood and middle childhood, starting with ADHD. We'll start with a brief history which might surprise you, hopefully. It's fair to say that as long as there's been people, there have been neurodiverse people, including individuals with ADHD. In terms of its discussion in the Americas, the first reference came in the very, very tail end of the 1700s. It was described by Crichton then as the disease of attention. Do you need to know his name? No. By mid-1800s, West renamed it the syndrome, the nervous child syndrome. And no, you don't need to know West's name either, but now it's the nervous child. By 1960s, early 1960s that is, it was renamed minimal brain dysfunction, a little bit ominous. By DSM-2, which came out in 1968, and no, you don't need to know the years of the DSMs, in 1968, minimal brain dysfunction had evolved into hyperkinetic reaction of childhood. By DSM-3, 1980 to the year if you should care, and if you don't, that's fine too. So the DSM-2 hyperkinetic reaction of childhood in 1980 becomes something much more familiar, attention deficit disorder with or without hyperactivity, and all that occurring in a little under 200 years. So to answer the second bullet, when did it appear in the DSM? Well, in 1968, conceptually it was there, but not by term. Conceptually it was the hyperkinetic reaction of childhood, but in terms of a near exact term that we would recognize now, that would have been in 1980 with DSM-3, and that would be attention deficit disorder with or without hyperactivity. So there you go, depending on how you want to look at it, 1968 or 1980. Let's consider some general information. More common in boys or girls, as I assume you probably suspect, more common in boys, about twice as common. But how common is that? About 13% of boys versus about 6% of girls. But that being said, girls are less likely to have motor symptoms, just having problems of inattention instead, so are more likely to get overlooked. They're not annoying the bus driver, their parents, their teachers, their peers. They're sitting quietly, not paying attention, so might not get diagnosed, might not get treated. ADHD results in not only academic problems, but also social problems and other potential problems down the road. Common comorbidities, other conditions the individual is likely to have or more likely to have, include something called oppositional defiant disorder, conduct disorder, and even autism spectrum disorder. Next, let's look at the two categories of features and the two basic types of presentations. Now that we've considered the history, what ranking does ADHD represent in terms of child visits to mental health professionals? Top 10? Probably. Top 5? Probably again. But where do you think it would be? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? It, as you might suspect, is very high, actually the first reason why children are taken to a mental health professional. It's interesting, though, that many similar behaviors are found in all children, but the difference is the severity and the number of symptoms. I thought I would sneak in the term qualitative versus quantitative into your vocabulary if it's not there already. It's a good college level concept. If a difference is qualitative, it's difference in type or kind or nature. If it's quantitative, it has to do with quantity. In other words, number. So qualitative, like the word quality, quantitative, like the word quantity. So if these behaviors are found in many children, but different in the number and severity, which one is it? Qualitative or quantitative? Hopefully you're leaning towards quantitative, because it would be. Other details to sneak in here. Symptoms, if you're a parent, useful to know, symptoms will usually peak somewhere between 6 and 8, squarely in middle childhood, and will start to diminish at age 11, when the child is now starting to leave middle childhood. Is it hereditary? Yes, it is. So if you're a parent, beware of the curse. I hope you get a child just like you, because don't forget, they will be your grandchild, and you will still have an ADHD child in your life. Let's talk about the two categories of features and the three types of presentations. The features are inattention and impulsivity / motor activity related. Let's focus on inattention first. So first and foremost, lack of paying attention and sustaining attention. And it drives parents a bit crazy. It's not for everything. It's just things they find disinteresting. Parents talking, rules, teachers, homework. Things that they find interesting, their hobbies, for example, or TV or social media, they can do the same as any other child. And this is just the way they're wired. They tend to be more disorganized than other children, so which means they tend to lose things more than other children. They tend to make careless mistakes. They know how to do an answer, they know how to do an activity, but they're just not paying attention, and it's done poorly. Doesn't listen, so they listen to maybe the first half of the sentence, but not the second, or maybe not at all. Dislikes applying themselves, dislikes work because it requires paying attention, and doesn't follow directions. In terms of impulsivity or motor, fidgeting. Now they have done studies of having students that are ADHD and fidget and not fidget, and they actually process better if they do fidget. So as long as they're not disrupting others, fidgeting really should not be discouraged. Talkative is basically motor activity of the mouth, talking a whole lot, giving too much detail, too information, not answering the questions, so you have to redirect them to, let's ignore that for now and focus on the answer. Overactivity in general, such as for the teacher, the child, or the bus driver, the child will be frequently out of seat perhaps. Blurting out answer when everybody else is raising their hands, again the impulsivity of not being able to restrain one's answer. And difficulty managing emotions. ADHD people, for the most part, have strong emotions. They're passionate people, and they will need to learn to manage those strong emotions. Now, in terms of types of presentations, some individuals present primarily with inattention features, very little in terms of impulsivity and motor. Other individuals are primary impulsivity or motor symptoms with very little difficulty in inattention. But very commonly, it's a mixed type having prominent features of each. We know that girls are more likely to have the inattention-only feature, which is unfortunate in some ways because they're less likely to be annoying people, less likely to get attention, less likely to get diagnosed, and therefore less likely to get treated, and quite possibly less possible to have positive outcomes. Let's now consider ADHD treatment options. Most people think of medications first, which is not necessarily a good thing. You've probably heard of Ritalin, perhaps Adderall and Concerta. Do you know what drug class they would all be in? Hopefully you're saying stimulants. There's also newer non-stimulant medications like Strattera. The stimulant medications have issues. Sometimes the child sells them, sometimes the bully steals them, sometimes the siblings or the parents sell them. They can also cause anxiety or depression in some children. They also can affect appetite. Children often on stimulants are well behind where they should be in terms of height and weight. sometimes you can change the amount of the drug or the timing of the drug. For other children, it's sleep issues. Again, it might be the timing or the amount. And every time you get these drugs calibrated, the child grows, and now it's not sufficient for their new size and height. Consider, by the way, one of the advantages is it requires less frequent pill taking, which is a nice advantage if you're dealing with a child or anyone for that matter. These medications improve attention, but they're typically insufficient in and of themselves to produce a satisfactory outcome. Let's consider therapy. Sometimes therapy works well without medications, and it's always desirable not to medicate anybody, especially with children if you don't have to. An invention called token economy, when this works by creating a list of acceptable behaviors, and when the child does that acceptable behavior, they immediately earn a token, which can be later on traded in for something of value. So in and of itself, it has no value, but it can be traded in. So maybe if you do that thing 5 times, you get a token, which might be an extra 10 minutes of video games, or 10 minutes staying up, or what have you. And later on, as they get more advanced, you can give them a warning, and if they don't adjust immediately, a token gets taken away. Eventually, you'll wean them off tokens, and basically it's a tool in which the child learns to control themselves. Back in the day, I did a course for parents for cooperative extension. The first half was general parenting. The second part, which I did not teach, was token economies. There's also family intervention, teaching the family skills to deal with the child properly. And also cognitive training, which is focusing on executive function skills. Now take a moment and see if you remember any of these executive functions. Attention's one. Organization, planning, time management, regulating emotions, or inhibiting behaviors. They call it inhibitory control. So if you consider all those sort of things are executive functions, and all those sort of things the ADHD child is usually well deficient on. So training in executive functioning has been clearly studied very thoroughly and is definitely beneficial. So therapy alone would be the best option. If that doesn't work, combined with medications. Unfortunately, most parents want to push for medications without the work that goes on with therapy. And if the doctor won't give them the medications, often they'll go doctor shopping, and they won't take long before they find a doctor that will medicate the child. But this should really be the step after therapy options have not worked, not the first step. Treatment of ADHD in both forms is essential for numerous reasons, including lowered self-esteem, peer rejection, academic issues, or even school failure, including increased dropping out rate, various mental health issues, including but not limited to learning disabilities, drug issues, conduct disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, anxiety disorders, mood disorders, also job instability, changing jobs more frequently than other people, relationship instability, changing relationships more than other people, increased risk of traffic accidents. I've had more than a few ADHD students share with me that they felt that it was a bad idea for them to drive at that stage of their life, and I definitely respect that decision. Also, increased risk of incarceration. If you're saying, OMG, I'm ADHD, none of these are definite. I had a very smart, gifted peer in graduate school that I would never have known he was ADHD until he shared that with me. My brother is ADHD, and he's happily married, has a job in which he is managerial over quite a few people, makes a lot more than a teacher at a community college, guaranteed. So in no way any of these are guaranteed, but they just have to be kept in mind so they don't evolve into real issues. With all this focus on the negatives of ADHD, I think it's only fair that we mention a few of the advantages or compensations. In a time when most people in our culture have trouble with maintaining good weight and being overweight, a person with ADHD is more likely to be very active and less likely to have issues of weight and all the many, many health issues that go with being overweight. Also, in a time where many people have to go to school and do a job, or at some points in their life do a job and a half, a person with ADHD has more energy to be able to do this. Also, a lot of us don't have the energy to do formal exercise or sports teams in addition to other responsibility. A person with ADHD is more likely to have the energy that would allow them to do sports or exercise in addition to the regular activities that they must do in life. Also, people with ADHD have strong emotions, which can be a challenge for them to learn how to control. But on the positive side, being passionate is a plus in life. So it's not all bleak, it's not all negative. When I was doing a final review of the slide, I noticed that I didn't include in the list of various mental health issues autism. There's a significant overlap between ADHD and autism. Research puts it between 15 and 25%, which I know is a huge range, but still, even at the low end, 15% is significant. 25% is 1 in 4. I also noted that it'd be a good place to review the term comorbidity if I didn't already. Remember, comorbidity is having 2 or more mental health conditions at the same time. So you can see there's a considerable number of conditions that ADHD is comorbid with potentially. I also want to slip into my coverage that ADHD people, as both middle childhood, teens, adults, have a bigger problem with procrastination, so they're going to have to learn skills and tools to aid them with this issue. Of course, many of us that are non-ADHD also have this issue, but still, it will very likely be a much bigger problem for them, and that could really lead into problems in, for example, job issues and other areas as well. Academic issues, obviously, too. One last detail related to job instability and general impact of life. Uh, about 1/3 of people with ADHD will still have significant symptoms as adults, which means 2/3 will have minor or almost no symptoms. But in terms of the 1/3 that will have symptoms, it specifically shows us the importance of treatment for individuals with ADHD. Let's consider the learning disabilities, now called specific learning disabilities. To be diagnosed with this, the ability in a specific area needs to be substantially below, quoted, from those expected for their age, specifically being in the bottom 7%. Specific areas include spelling, reading, perhaps you've heard of dyslexia, that's our term for our reading one, writing, and math. There's a high comorbidity with ADHD. The individual cannot have intellectual developmental disorder, so if they're poor in multiple areas across the board due to lower intelligence, that's not a learning disability. A child with a learning disability has normal or maybe even above normal intelligence, but they have one specific area of functionality issues. The earlier they're treated, the better the outcomes. Untreated, the child often suffers from low self-esteem, stress, academic failure, risk of dropping out of school, all sorts of things. So again, earlier the treatment, the more successful that child will be. We start our discussion of autism spectrum disorders in the early childhood chapter, but let's continue it. Let's start with how common it is. Now, if you were to look in your textbook, it would say 1 in 59 children. But remember, your textbook was printed in 2020, so it had to use available data, which were 2017. We're going to use current data. According to CDC, it is not 1 in 59. it is 1 in 36 children. So huge jump. In terms of adults, if you're curious, it would be not 1 in 36, but 1 in 45. In terms of boys versus girls, it's 4 times as common as boys. So 4 boys out of every 100 are on the spectrum, as compared to 1 girl out of 100 on the spectrum. If that was too quick, definitely feel free to go ahead and replay it. We discussed earlier that the overwhelming evidence is that it is not caused by shots. Of all the studies, only 2 found a positive relationship. They were both performed by the same author. They were both recalled by the journals they were published in due to shoddy methodology and conclusions and statistics. So clearly not caused by shots. Now, many people on the spectrum identify themselves as being a person with Asperger's, and that's fine and understandable, though the DSM-5 and the newest one, DSM-5-TR, no longer use the term Asperger's. But since people use it and have been labeled with it, it's good to know what it means. Asperger's, think of it as autism light. The person has many of the key features of autism, but at a very mild level, and often are able to do as well, or sometimes even better than other people in terms of education and vocation. So offers some challenges, but maybe a few benefits as well. And again, not recognized by the DSMs anymore. You should probably know what DSM stands for. Hopefully you picked that up in Introp Psych. I'll let you think for a moment. Definitional, deterministic, diagnostic. Indeed, it would be the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And you might know that the DSM was published by the APA, but which APA? American Psychological Association or American Psychiatric Association? Hopefully you're leaning towards the latter. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual has been published always by the American Psychiatric Association. Let's consider the key features, some of which will need to be there. The key feature is the social deficits, the social difficulties, the social challenges experienced by a person on the spectrum. For example, body language is something that they often miss, they do not read, they have to study it, and if they study it, maybe they'll be able to learn it, but sometimes not. They may stand too close, they might ask too many personal questions. When they exasperate a teacher or a class by asking too many questions, they probably won't pick up on it. So you might have to verbalize, I think you're asking too many questions and irritating the teacher, that sort of thing. IQs can range anywhere from 0 to gifted. Indeed, some of the most brilliant people in our history appear to be on the spectrum. Motor oddities, formerly called stemming, may be engaged in. People with severe autism might engage them very frequently. A person with mild autism might not engage in them at all, or just under times of high stress. They'd be unusual movements, particularly of the fingers. They might be vocal, so unusual sounds. Often the person is not aware they're doing that, and often the person is not able to control their appearance. Also very typical in autism is restricted range of interest. They're hyper interested in a few topics, and they might always bring up these topics in conversation. You try to move maybe the conversation away from it, and they move it back. So passionate about often very narrow things, often very esoteric things. Many people on the spectrum find calm environments to be overly stimulating. You might have noticed the presence of rooms that allow autistic people to get away from too much noise or too much sound. Last detail, autism spectrum is considered to be an aspect of neurodiversity, so a person may identify as being neurodiverse, which is a much wider term. Some people believe it's synonymous with being on the autistic spectrum, which it is not. Autistic spectrum is one of the major forms of neurodiversity, but there are other forms of neurodiversity too. Next, we're going to consider intelligence and then tie into issues of intelligence, intellectual disability, in other words. So at this point, I would hope that you'd be able to know the first two stages and perhaps the one that we're about to discuss. So take a moment and then see how well you do on the next slide. No peeking though. So hopefully, not only are you able to identify the stages, but also the ages, at least of the stages we've covered. So sensory motor up until age 2, pre-operational to 2 to 6 or 2 to 7. Concrete operational, which we're entering now, is typically looked at as being from 7 to 11 or 12. But we should also note that many people never leave the concrete operational stage. We'll discuss that in the next part of the lecture. So in early childhood, we discussed the pre-operational stage, and we define the term operation. So using that knowledge, please consider this question. Based on that, would a person in the concrete operational stage be capable of logical thinking? And that would be a yes or a no. So we'll put that question on back burner for a moment. So again, we said the stage begins at what age and could end at what age? So it begins at 6 or 7 and ends at 11 or 12, but not always. Do they or do they not have operational thinking? Well, pre-operational literally meant for operations, so clearly no. But concrete operational, clearly they have a type of operational thinking, so a resounding yes, they are capable of logical thinking. But to modify the answer a little bit, the logical thinking is of a concrete form. So that contrasts with abstract thinking. So they're not yet capable of abstractions and hypotheticals. Their thinking is more of a concrete, physical bound, experiential nature. So yes, definitely operational thinking of the concrete type. Consider all the errors of thinking that we know at a pre-operational stage that they've moved away from. List as many as you can. So the pre-operational individual engages in such thinking as transductive thinking and syncretic thinking, which our concrete operational person would not. They also engage in egocentrism. They also engage in animism. They also lack conservation, in part because they do have, unfortunately, centration, and they lack reversibility. So these are many of the changes in thinking that are solved or felt manually passed, if you want to use that phrasing, when the person arrives at the concrete operational stage. Next, consider the syllogism on the right. Knowing that I made up the name of the people, I made up the name of the person, and it's a test of logic and see how you do on the answer. Answer the last question and then listen to the answer, if you will. When I cover Piaget and intro psych, I always use a similar logical syllogism. I tell my class I made up the name of the people. In intro, it's Warbingi, and for you, it's the Bebembi, totally made up. And I ask my class, when I'm teaching them live, tell me the first thing that comes to your mind that they love. Sometimes it's cats and cars, sometimes it's pizza, sometimes it's balloons, whatever. So I jot it down. For you guys, they all love the month of March. I say, give me the name of the first man, woman, or child that comes to mind, and I jot that down. Since I made it up for you guys, I use the name PSY222. And consider this, so all Bebembi people love the month of March. PSY222 is a Bebembi. Can we know with certainty whether or not PSY222 loves March? Think about that for a moment and arrive to your answer. been teaching full-time since 1997 and been using a similar question to this nearly the entire time, and I find it fascinating. Originally, the entire class, year after year after year, and year after year after year, 100% would get it correct. Then occasionally I would get one or two people that would give me the wrong answer. In the last few semesters, sometimes as many as half of the class will not be able to give the correct answer, suggesting that those people are still, at least partially, if not fully, in the concrete operational stage, which is not a bad thing, but it's just interesting from a teacher's point of view. So let's see. All Bubembe people love March. PSY222 is a Bubembe. Can we know with certainty? Absolutely yes. All means all. All doesn't mean 97 or 98. All means 100%. So if 100% of these people all love the month of March, and PSY222 is one of them, he must love March. And yet, person in the concrete stage, well, I don't know the Bubembe. Well, they're a type of people. I don't know PSY222. Doesn't matter. And you go round and round, but a lot of times you cannot convince the people that you can know with certainty that PSY222 indeed is a lover of March. So what determines whether or not a person stays in the concrete operational stage or leaves it? In no small part, it's exposure to the formal educational process. In many areas of the world, there's no formal education experienced by the child, and they remain concrete thinkers. In cultures such as ours, where formal education and different types of thinking are taught and learned, usually the person will progress out of the concrete operational stage into the formal operational stage. But still, people who can live very normal, successful lives do stay in the concrete operational stage. So don't be overly distressed if you are showing some signs of still having concrete thinking. Let's specifically consider vocabulary and grammar in middle childhood. Vocabulary is going to increase dramatically, fourfold actually, but just notice a dramatic increase. The average child is going to be learning 20 new words a day. And this is not without active study. This is just spontaneously. They will now understand and perhaps even use a little bit of sarcasm. If they have not undertaken a secondary language learning by now, it should be definitely undertaken by this point. Waiting to high school, the child will probably never speak with an accent that would be proper. Certain sounds they might not be able to make. So this is a time when parents and hopefully also the school will undertake that secondary or even third language learning. Intelligence is a very interesting construct. If you consider intro psychology, a definition of learning or sensation or memory are very similar. But if you consider intelligence, it varies dramatically from how one person considers it to another, or from one theorist, how they conceptualize it to another. So instead of having one definition, I pulled out three, maybe off the top of my head, three major theorists, and we'll see how they conceptualize intelligence, and then we'll consider how it's measured and continue our discussion from there. As we're seeing, there is not one unified theory of intelligence. Sternberg is offered us a very popular and well-regarded theory. Another very well-regarded and popular theory of intelligence is Raymond Cattell's view of intelligence. We'll also learn about Raymond Cattell's view of personality, which is also equally esteemed by psychologists. He looks at intelligence as having two distinct components, that of fluid and crystallized. Fluid involves how you think, the different types of thinking, which would definitely include critical thinking, as well as inductive reasoning, deductive reasoning, and analyze mathematical properties of things, and so on. Abstract thinking. This contrasts to crystallized thinking, more specifically crystallized intelligence, which refers to facts. So maybe as a mnemonic, think of a crystal necklace, maybe big quartz crystal, so it's unisex, so everybody can wear it. And every crystal represents a specific area of knowledge. So maybe your crystal for intelligence of music is huge because you know a lot about music. Maybe your crystal intelligence about cooking is very small, or vice versa. But anyway, crystallized intelligence represents the various facts, the bits of knowledge. Cattell's view is very popular amongst developmental psychologists because these two different types of intelligences change very differently as we age. So a very useful theory to psychologists and gerontologists. Let's start with the viewpoint of Robert Sternberg and his triarchic or triarchical theory of intelligence. As you might want to indeed logically guess, it has a three-part component to it. Practical, what to do in day-to-day living when problems arise. Analytical, think of it as logic. Creative, you might think creativity is a gift. He considers it to be a full-fledged area of intelligence. Let's now consider Gardner's multiple areas of intelligence. Most teachers teach 7. He did extend his work to 9, but we'll stay with his basic 7. Linguistic is verbal intelligence. Let's say that a teacher wants to measure his or her or their students' verbal intelligence. There's so many ways to do so. Try to think as many ways as you can. And then jump to the musical heading and consider, likewise for musical, there are many ways of measuring musical intelligence. Do a short list of those ways too, and then I'll continue. So for my students, I could see if they could read something using an accent, if they could read something aloud, if they could do a public speech. I could assess their vocabulary. I could look at their reading speed, or for that matter, their reading comprehension. Can they speak multiple languages and read multiple languages fluently? Those are just a few of the different aspects of linguistic intelligence. Logic and math, I won't elaborate too much. I think they're kind of straightforward. Spatial, having to do with space, distance, design, layout. So are you good at recognizing faces? Can you draw a map? Can you read a map? Can you draw? Can you remember how to get from here to there, or give good directions on getting from here to there, and so on. Musical. So what did you come up with in terms of a way a teacher could assess musical intelligence? Can they read music? Can they sing in key? Can they tune an instrument? Can they play an instrument? Do they have knowledge of different musical genres? Can they keep a beat? Can they create a good beat? And so on. So many different aspects of musical intelligence. Body kinesthetic is the ability to use your body skillfully. Consider many careers demand this. Can you think of a few? Maybe this fine handwork of a surgeon, or a professional athlete such as a gymnast, a rugby player, or a ballerina. Apparently, ballerinas are actually the most athletic of all the athletes. Can you skip? Can you jump? Can you dance with fluidity? So the ability to use your body skillfully. Next to demand that you know roots of intra and inter. Intra means within, like intramural commerce. That'd be commerce within a state, intra. So intrapersonal knowledge means self-knowledge. Do you know yourself? Do you know your goals? Do you learn from your mistakes? Do you know your values? And so on. Inter means between. Interstate commerce would be commerce between estates. So interpersonal knowledge. Can you work well with others? Can you predict their behaviors? Can you influence their behaviors? Can you enhance morale? And so on. So these are Gardner's basic 7 areas of intelligence. People going into the teaching professions often have to know and use Gardner's multiple areas of intelligence as part of their daily routine. So now let's consider intelligence testing. During my youth, it was a norm to do intelligence testing. They did the entire 7th grade at one particular day. There are 2 basic choice of tests, group tests, for example, doing the 7th grade, versus individual tests. Group tests are given to large numbers of children at the same time. It's actually illegal to do so in some states, this mass testing of yesteryear. Individualized tests are given by the professional who is trained and permitted to use the test to an individual. The typical purpose would either be to identify learning disabilities or intellectual disability, or the opposite, extremes in intelligence, all for the purpose of giving them the best learning environment possible given their particular needs. On the bottom you see images from the two most commonly used one-on-one tests. On the right, the Stanford-Binet, and on the left, the Wechsler. On the next slide, I just included a sample of the sort of questions you would see for the Wechsler child version test, just in case you're curious. Let's consider IQ. In order to do the extremes, we have to know what the average is first. Do you know the average IQ? Think for a moment. 75? No, that's actually called borderline, almost intellectually disabled. The most average IQ would be 100. Given an intellectual disability would be the top and bottom 2% of the bell curve. So flip to the next page when you're done listening and write in the cutoff for giftedness and the cutoff for disability. Let's consider the teaching of intellectually disabled children. As a review, consider the IQ score that the child's IQ must be below. So 69/70 is the cutoff, so we would be talking about children with IQs below 70. But sometimes the term borderline is used for individuals who are not intellectually disabled but are close and therefore do have some special needs. Those individuals who have IQs 70 to 79. The law requires that the child be placed in the least restrictive environment. Concerns about mainstreaming include peer rejection, and in the other direction, the child, depending on the nature of the disability, may be disruptive to the class, especially if there's uncontrolled verbalizations or motor activity. And aid is generally beneficial to all members of the class. Children will often benefit from spending some time, or maybe the majority of the time, in a special resource room with the special education teachers specialized in meeting their needs. Let's consider gifted children next. What IQ score did we associate them as having? What score or higher? Hopefully you're leaning towards a score of 130 or more. How would it be assessed? It would be assessed via intelligence tests, typically one given on a one-to-one basis. What were some of those tests called? One began with a W. It would be the Wechsler or the Stanford-Binet. Gifted children require additional stimulation. It could be in the form of extra projects, attending a couple advanced classes, or even sometimes grade skipping. If not stimulated, they can become bored, perform poorly and even before average, become disruptive, or even drop out of school. My best friend in graduate school, who got both a PhD in psychology and an MBA, was a high school dropout because she was unstimulated. So the walkaway is that even high school graduates have unlimited potential as long as they return to education, and hopefully the critical importance of meeting children at their developmental state and giving them a proper specific educational level. Unlike other nations of Western nations that are similar to us, quality of school education varies dramatically in our country from region by region, state by state, city by city, or even district to districts within the same city. The differences are in no small part due to funding differences. School funding is based on property taxes, so poor areas generate less property taxes. So arguably the most needy students get the lowest quality education, and the cycle of poverty therefore continues. There's also huge curriculum differences, particularly by party that's in charge of the particular state. Consider the following quote. Many states have bills proposing to keep teachers from teaching divisive subjects that cause students to feel discomfort, and which aim too broadly and vaguely at teaching about critical race theory or LGBTQ plus issues. The quote, the link that I've included is optional, but it will show you the 36 states and 47 bills that have been either passed or under consideration for banning teaching about racial history. So imagine being any student who's trying to get a good sense of politics and history of this country and not learning about history of Native Americans and particularly Hispanic Americans and above all people of color. Imagine being one of those students, perhaps you are. How can you take education fully seriously if it basically disenfranchises your whole personal history? Consider that only 12 states mandate teaching about the Holocaust. Apparently knowing about the Holocaust is an optional thing. Many states have abstinence-only quote-unquote sex education, which means it's not sex education at all. These do tend to be Republican states, and they have a much higher rate of STIs and unintended pregnancy compared to the states that do have legitimate sex education courses. And as I mentioned, 36 states have 47 bills current or proposed that ban teaching about racial history. You might say, well, not in New York State. Well, actually, there have been several bills proposed in New York State to ban the teaching of critical race theory. We'll continue this discussion on our next slide. I should mention that we're fortunate educationally to live in the Northeast. If you look at the top 10 states in terms of child performance, every single state in the Northeast is in the top 10. New York's middle at number 6. There are also two non-Northeast states in the top 10. Colorado is in the middle, and Virginia is on the bottom of the top 10, but that's kind of the cusp between the North and the South. But anyway, so we're positioned very well in the Northeast in terms of our children becoming educated young adults, such as you all. Many states have current or proposed legislation prohibiting the instruction of content related to race. Many, if not most, American students are familiar, or most Americans are unfamiliar with the concept of Red Summer. Occurred in 1919, 1920, 1921, and particularly the most significant of the massacres, Black Wall Street. Black Wall Street was a name given to an area in Tulsa, Oklahoma, by the people that lived there. It was an affluent area, thriving with businesses, and on a certain day, and I'll have you view the attached video, it was violently attacked by both ground and, believe it or not, by the air. You can see on the left a vibrant city, on the right just shells of front sides of houses. We don't know how many people are killed. Some estimates are 50 people killed, others are in the several hundreds. Those people were never compensated for the violent demolition of their homes, their businesses, loss of loved ones. It made national news. They were promised by the governor that they would be compensated. They never were. So families that rose up into the middle class, had a home, had a business, had not anything more than the clothes on their back, putting them into poverty, their children, and quite possibly the next generation as well. So do please go ahead and listen to the link and learn more about Black Wall Street in particular. I should also note that the Red Summer events weren't limited just to the South. A major event occurred in Chicago, Illinois, and a major event occurred in New York City, in our own state. Let's consider some of poverty's pervasive effects. We've already considered poor education. Nutritional issues can impact short-term and long-term health, as well as actual survival, in other words, actual longevity. Higher exposure to environmental toxins. So the chemical facility and the garbage dump and the garbage burning facility are not going to be put next to affluent neighborhoods. So a significant problem no matter what part of the country. Lack of health care, including dental care. Dental infections can cause not only pain but poison the body and are associated with adults with all sorts of conditions from miscarriage to heart disease. So considered to be optional in this country is hearing aids, but not in terms of health needs. Chronic illnesses, particularly asthma, are much more common in poorer children. Violence and other toxic stressors can cause changes in the HPA axis, permanently altering the way the child and later adult reacts to stress. And again, what did that HPA axis stand for? Think for a moment. Is it hippocampus, pineal axis? No, how about hypothalamic pituitary axis?